Welcome back, Rebels. Today we're going to continue our discussion on things people often get wrong or need clarification on by talking about keywords. So what are keywords? In Star Wars Destiny, keywords are predefined abilities that have a very specific function. Several cards in the game have the keywords we will be talking about today. There's only 3 keywords at the time of this recording, and we're going to also go over some of those cards that have the keywords, and I'll try also to explain how these keywords can have an impact on the game so that you can start using these abilities in a tactful way. Check it out after this. Alright, so let's jump right into this. Some cards in the game have the Guardian keyword, and this means that before they are activated, they can absorb a die showing damage from the opponent's pool, forcing the damage to be dealt to the Guardian character. If you watch my Red Commons video, I've already mentioned Cannon Fodder and Heroism, which do something similar. This ability, however, is built right into the character. After absorbing that die, the character then activates as normal, rolling out its die, whether it's 1 or 2 die. And this ability is very strong in Destiny because it enhances board control and lets you choose where the damage that is sitting on your opponent's side of the table goes. And that can be really, really powerful for breaking up big combo plays. Early on in Destiny, there was a lot of confusion as to how Guardian worked because the rules wrote it one way, and cards like Rebel Trooper and even when Spirit of Rebellion came out, Royal Guard had the text all wrong. And we'll talk a little bit about that later because the rule book specifically states that before a character with Guardian activates, its owner may remove 1 die showing damage from their opponent's dice pool to deal damage equal to the value showing on that die removed to the activating Guardian character. So, you know, it's difficult to explain these things sometimes in text, and they get really, really wordy. So when we go over it later, I'll highlight what the difference between what that rule says and what some of the Guardian stuff says. But essentially, what you need to know is that the damage that you take with Guardian is not considered ranged damage or melee damage. It's just considered damage because for the purposes of resolving effects that impact damage taken, like armor plating, personal shield, and hunker down, it loses its damage type. Similarly, any additional effects that are inherent to the die that is removed are also lost. So for example, using Guardian to remove a Vibroknife die does not make the value on that die unblockable because the value that you're removing from that die is not considered melee damage, which Vibroknife makes unblockable as long as it is in your pool. It's just considered damage. So if you remove a 2 ranged die, you just take 2 damage. You don't take 2 ranged damage, you just take 2 damage. So I know that may feel like, oh, well, that's kind of silly, Gray. What difference does it make? It actually makes quite a lot of difference when you look at some things like I had mentioned before, armor plating, personal shield, and hunker down. If you take a look at those cards, you will realize that using Guardian to remove dice of those damage types will not allow those effects to proc, for better or for worse. Now the second keyword that we're going to talk about here is ambush, and ambush is probably one of the easiest keywords to understand. It just means you take an extra action. The rules specifically have it written as this: after playing and resolving a card with ambush, a player may immediately take another action. If a player is allowed to take an action outside of their turn, they immediately take it. So if there's some condition that lets you play a card immediately or an effect immediately that is already in play that gives you ambush, basically it would be like you do something to trigger that ability, the opponent meets a condition, activates something that creates ambush, they get to go, I guess, essentially twice in a row, but the ambush action doesn't count as the action for their turn, because remember that rounds in Destiny are made up of turns. And turns are made up of actions, and every turn you start with one action unless a card, ability, or effect grants you additional actions in that same turn. Things like force speed or playing cards with ambush. Cards like hit and run that we've covered in the Red Commons video, cards like bait and switch, cards like vibro knife, cards like holdout blaster are some of the cards that you're going to see in this video which have ambush, and a good portion of these cards all see play because taking additional actions is pretty good in Destiny, as it turns out. Alright, so last but not least, we've got Redeploy. Redeploy is one of the most highly valued keywords in the game. This keyword only appears on upgrades. The rule states that after the attached character is defeated, its controller may move this upgrade to any of their other characters. The upgrade die moves to the new character card, even if it wasn't a dice pool. The redeploy keyword ignores play restrictions when attaching to a new character. Essentially, it's like one of your characters pried the upgrade from your other dead character's cold, lifeless fingers. This is serious, guys. This is Star Wars. People die. And they get their weapons stolen, apparently. So, weapons with redeploy, when a new set comes out, they always turn heads. Because they don't leave play unless your opponent plays something that blows the upgrade up or returns it to your hand. So, as such, you get a lot of value out of whatever you paid to get that upgrade out onto the field. Just about every good aggro deck in the meta has one or more redeploy weapons. They're just a staple in the game because of how strong this particular keyword is. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the Guardian cards that currently exist in Star Wars Destiny. There are currently only 3 heroes that actually have the Guardian keyword on them. I should say 3 characters. And they're right here. So you've got Rebel Trooper is the original guy from Awakenings. And he's 7 health, and he's got Guardian, and he's red. So he's cheap at 8 points, and he has a role in some decks, or at least did. He pops up every now and then in hero mill decks. But he's only got 7 health, so, you know, if you're looking at absorbing a bunch of 2 dice or 3 dice, he's not going to really make, you know, he's not in it for the long run here, guys. So, in Spirits of Rebellion, Villain got a Royal Guard at 9 points and 8 health, and you can see his die is actually pretty similar to the Rebel Trooper die. He's got 1 more HP. Obviously, he's more melee focused, and instead of the resource side, he's got a second shield die, and his modifier is a little better in terms of the damage. So you see him often paired with someone like Elite Darth Vader from Awakenings. There are some people who play single die Emperor Palpatine with a Royal Guard, since he's 21 points and this one's 9. And you know, he's actually pretty good. The restriction on him is you can't play blue abilities on him, but you can do some Sith holocron tricks with it. So that's definitely a topic for another video. Also, in Spirit of Rebellion, we actually got the most powerful Guardian character here in Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a bit like Luke from Awakenings, but quite a bit different as well, as he has Guardian, sort of a similar die. You know, he's not making shields, but he's focusing a little more, and he sort of has a 1 and a 3 rather than a 2 and a 3, and he's got 1 less HP. But he's also got an interesting triggered ability that before this character is defeated, you may play a blue card from your hand to discard pile for free. So there's some really interesting stuff that you can do with Obi-Wan, as long as you can keep some shields on him, which, as you can tell from his die, doesn't create on his own. He's actually a pretty good Guardian character, but he's going to be the guy you're going to run in your deck as sort of your main dude at 16 or 20 points, so you got to use him wisely. And there's a lot of strategy to using Obi-Wan that we won't talk about here. There's plenty of videos on YouTube, though, if you want to check out how to use Obi-Wan. Now, while these are the only 3 characters that actually have the Guardian keyword written on them, there are 2 other ways to acquire Guardian in this game, and we'll take a look at that next. All right, so on this screen we've got two cards. They're both from Awakenings, and one of these sees a lot of play, the other one doesn't. And the one that sees a lot of play is actually Captain Phasma here on the right. She's got a real solid die, and for her point cost, she's 12-15. And what's cool about Phasma is her ability. She gives your non-unique characters the Guardian keyword. So essentially, Phasma creates her own little army of die-controlling minions. There's some pretty good decks out there that do run her that are actually pretty competitive. You'll see her often run with a First Order Stormtrooper for 7 points with her elite, so that brings you up to 22 points, and then you can throw in a Guavian Enforcer, which is a 9 hit point, 8 point yellow character, so you get to splash yellow in your deck. She is very powerful, and the idea behind that deck actually is not only using Guardian to keep Phasma alive and extend your game, but also to use redeploy weapons to keep the weapons that you are putting out onto the field. So you keep Phasma alive, load up your troops, and shoot things down. The other way, and really the only other way to get Guardian onto a character of any kind is to use Personal Escort. Now this is an upgrade ability, and it's villain only, and it's 1 resource, and it says the attached character has the Guardian keyword. So you can actually make any character you want in the game have Guardian, as long as you meet the conditions of running red, spending a resource on this, and putting it in your deck to begin with. It's not typically a card you will see a lot in casual play even, and definitely not in competitive, but this is the kind of card that would shine in like a draft format. Something that just, adds some additional control elements to the board. So right now it doesn't see a lot of play. I doubt it ever will, but hey, you never know, right? So let's go back to our original 3 Guardians, because these are the guys, at least the first 2, Rebel Trooper and Royal Guard, that you're going to see a lot of. So if you're just starting to get into the game, you're definitely going to see some Royal Guard sitting across the table, because he's a pretty good character with a good die at a good point cost and a good health pool, despite his drawback of not being able to play blue abilities on him directly. Obi-Wan will see some fringe play right now. His character deck with Rey at single die in the Spirit of Rebellion meta is considered what we call Tier 2. Tier 1 decks are things that you see a lot at tournaments. Tier 2 decks are decks that can beat Tier 1 decks but consistently don't. And then things below that are like Tier 3 and things that don't really meet into the conversation. Depending on when you're listening to this video, Obi-Wan may be a character that is non-existent and no one talks about at all anymore. But the deck you can build around him is pretty cool. And you can check out swdestinydb.com for some decks that do use Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, also Rebel Trooper, you won't see a whole lot of him because there's just heroes not too focused on Guardian for whatever reason. But Royal Guard is a really great card, so you're going to see a lot of him. Now, in terms of using Guardian wisely, there are a number of different things to keep in mind, and a lot of times how you're going to use your Guardian is just matters on what your opponent rolls. You want to use it ideally every single time you activate the character, because that's the only time you can do it. It's right before you activate, you eat the damage onto him, this character, and then you get to roll the character out, which might kill the character, which could save your main character from death, and that's the whole point of Guardian, right? Just to be a meat shield, essentially. But you want to take a look at the die that are in the pool, and you want to know a little bit about the meta somewhat. So when we talk about Vibro Knife later, you're going to want to take a look at how the interaction between Guardian and Vibro Knife works. But essentially, a Vibro Knife allows the melee damage dies in your pool to all be considered unblockable. So if you're running a deck that's really heavily shield themed, it would obviously be a hero deck because there's no villain deck that currently does that. Eating that one Vibro Knife die onto your Rebel Trooper or your Obi-Wan is going to make the rest of their damage blockable. So it's going to slip right. It's not going to slip underneath your shields. It's going to hit your shields. So take a look at what your opponent rolls and choose the die wisely. Another great example for Guardian is if If you know how dice resolve in this game, you need one black side at least to attach all of your blue modifiers to. And if you're looking across the table from a tube ranged die that's black sided and then 4 blue ones that are +1, +2, +2, +3, if you eat that black sided die with your guardian, all that other damage goes away because it can't be resolved on its own. So that's the use for guardian in this game. It's essentially to take a smaller amount of damage than you would potentially take on all of your characters. And also, the opponent gets to choose where the damage goes, right? With Guardian, you're saying, no, this guy takes this little amount of damage in the hope that when they reroll, which they most likely will if you eat the only black side die they have, that you're reducing the total amount of damage that you're going to take in a turn. So Guardian is a very strategic keyword, and it deserves a lot of respect. And perhaps because of how highly it is regarded in certain decks, like the Phasma decks, maybe that's why you don't see a whole lot of characters that have it. It is a really clutch keyword, and certainly has its uses and will for the entirety of this game. I can guarantee you that. All right, so let's talk about Ambush. So what I put on the screen here are actually all different kinds of cards. You've got an upgrade weapon in Vibroknife, you've got a support from Infamous, and you've got an event called Bait and Switch. Now, all of these cards do something that affects the ambush keyword in some way, and I could have easily just put up a bunch of weapons and said, hey, look, every time you play this weapon, it gives you an additional action because it says ambush. But I want you to gain a greater understanding of how ambush can impact this game and how the game uses ambush. So let's start with the Vibroknife. We've mentioned this one already before, but it's worth putting these 3 cards up on the screen all together because these are cards that you're going to see a lot of even when you're just starting out the game, because they are all cards that have value and they all see a fair bit of play, some more than others, but we'll talk about that as we go. So Vibroknife is such a popular weapon for a lot of different reasons. Number one, it is neutral and gray, so it can go in every single deck. So if your deck is running melee damage, which this die provides in heaps, then it's probably going to end up in your deck. It's also 2 cost, so it's cheap, it's rare, so it is more accessible than something like a legendary, and everybody owns at least 2 of these. And in my FLGS, they are pretty well traded. They always were, and heck, I've even got an extra one because it's just a card that is around. Now, Vibroknife is a great card because it also has ambush. And its text reads that while this die is in your pool, melee damage dealt by your dice, including this die, is unblockable. So when we talked about Guardian, Guardian is great to use against this card. Once this die hits the pool, it essentially turns every single melee die on the side of the opponent's pool into unblockable damage. But if you Guardian out this one die, whether it's the 1 or the 2 that you're gonna absorb, it puts all their damage back to regular old blockable damage. So that's cool. But it's got ambush, and so a lot of times you're going to see this played, they're going to roll out the same character that has it, and you're going to know exactly what you're staring at across the table. The second card, Infamous, is a 1-cost yellow support. It's also neutral, so you're going to see it in quite a number of yellow decks. Definitely Hanrei decks. You might see it in some Bounty Hunter themed decks with Aura Singh and Jango Fett. Feel free to take a look at those cards on swdestinydatabase.com as well, just to familiarize yourself with them. But what this does is, before you play a yellow card, you may exhaust the support, which means turn it to the side, just like activating a character, to give it the ambush keyword. So essentially, if you think about some of the upgrades that you can play or other cards that you can play an Infamous, and then next turn you can give the second Infamous you play ambush, which lets you do something in addition to that. So Infamous is really, really cool because it basically just says any yellow card you play, you can give it the ambush keyword. You can do it once per round, as long as you can't, ready it again and with some kind of hijinks. And that's really, really neat because it can make surprise plays happen, basically. You know, if you play, you cannot play a card that already has ambush with Infamous to give it ambush again, because ambush is a keyword that can only appear on a card once, or can only be granted on a card once. So Infamous is neat because it just gives yellow cards ambush for really no good reason. The last card here is called Bait and Switch, and it is a villain only card. And it is an event that does something and also has ambush. So this particular card allows you to turn one of your dice showing a resource side to any side, and then it has ambush. So if you're playing Darth Vader, and you're going to see this a lot in Darth Vader decks, if he rolls that resource side, you can bait and switch and say, hey, it's on a resource, I'm going to bait and switch it, turn it to the 3 melee side, and then use the ambush action to resolve that 3 melee dice alone, or all of the melee dice you have on the table. Because remember, an ambush action is just like any other action. It allows you to resolve any amount of dice as long as they are matching sides. So you could resolve all your specials, all your focuses, all your melee, all your ranged, etc. Obviously, bait and switch would only allow you to turn the resource die to another resource die if it had 2 resource sides on the same die, but no one does that. Most people flip a resource side to some sort of damage or focus in order to make things happen. So keep, it's good just to have these cards in the back of your mind, because you're going to see them a lot. They currently see so much play and are tricky little things. So ambushes is something that can be really rewarding. And so just like with Redeploy, it's always worth taking a look at the cards in the set that have ambush, because some of them might turn out to be really, really good, like Vibroknife. Last but not least, we have Redeploy. So up here on the screen, I've got 3 upgrades, because remember, Redeploy only affects upgrades. And there's sort of an order of just set, essentially. So the first one is Holdout Blaster. And just like Vibroknife, it sees a ton of play. It is essentially the gray ranged gun that goes in everyone's deck. So if you're playing a deck that has a lot of shooty stuff, you're going to play Holdout Blasters. It's also currently one of the most expensive cards in the game to own, despite it being a rare and being from the first set, which is pretty much out there all over the place now. But Holdout Blaster is so damn good because it not only has the Redeploy upgrade or keyword, it has the ambush keyword. So this thing gets a ton of extra value out. It basically never leaves play. Again, going back to the beginning, unless your opponent somehow removes it from the table with a disarm. Otherwise, it just never really sees play. It's also a victim of things like Imperial Inspection, which is a really, really overpowered support that villains can play that allows them to bounce upgrades that are 2 cost or less back to your hand. But against some character decks, you don't want to give them ambush again. So it's going to be in play. Let's put it that way, all right? Holdout Blaster is a pretty great weapon. It's got great sides. It's got a shield and a resource. It really stays in the game. And it's just so damn good because it has both of those keywords together. The second weapon on here is Chewie's Bowcaster, and as you can see, it's quite a bit more expensive. It's also a legendary, and it has Redeploy on it. This thing is an absolute beast of a weapon once you get it into play. I mean, it does 2 damage, 4 damage for a resource, or plus 3 range damage. So again, it's got 50% damage sides, just like the Holdout Blaster. Has a pay side. It's essentially a Holdout Blaster on crack. It's very, very good. And it has Redeploy. It doesn't have the ambush, but it has the Redeploy. This is something you're not going to, pay for, 4 resources for anyway. You're going to overwrite something else that's maybe a 2 or a 3. You might even be overwriting your Holdout Blaster to make it into a Bowcaster, which would certainly be a huge upgrade. And the Bowcaster the Redeploy really makes this weapon. If it didn't have Redeploy, it wouldn't be as worth its cost as it is now. But the fact that even if the character that's equipped to initially somehow is defeated, it still stays in play. And that can be really, really amazing. And last but not least, we've got a new upgrade from Empire at War, which is up here just because it's cheeky and funny. I think it's a one cost upgrade called Hate with Redeploy. After you activate attached character, you may deal 1 damage to deal 1 damage to deal 1 damage to another character. So this is very much a let the hate flow through you kind of thing. It's so weird, and this one's villain only, and it's in the new set, like I said, and it's only uncommon, you know. But this is something that if villain can find a way to get a lot of shields onto them, to deal that 1 damage to themselves, but deal 1 damage out on activation, that's pretty cool. So why is Redeploy so good? You know, it's not just that when a character dies, the weapon moves over and stays in play. Redeploy weapons, because of what they do, can actually be used and fired twice per turn with some proper setup. So I want you to imagine, for an example, that you've got 3 characters out, and you've got a character who's pretty low on health, who is currently wielding a holdout blaster. You probably want to roll that character out first in the turn because you're thinking, well, my opponent's probably going to take that character out, but if I get to go first, maybe I roll that character out, then they roll out, then I can resolve something on the holdout blaster. The holdout blaster die then leaves the pool. Maybe I shoot them for 2 for a resource, and I got some damage on the table. Then your opponent goes and kills that character. The holdout blaster then moves over to your second character, or whichever other character you want to give it to. Could be your third character. I don't know. It's an imaginary scenario. When you roll that character out, they get to roll out the holdout blaster die. So essentially, the holdout blaster gets to be fired twice that turn, right? Or at least it rolls out twice. What happens to that die once it hits the pool is sort of up for your, debate for your opponent whether they're going to remove it or not with some cards. But that's the magic of Redeploy. It's that these weapons not only get constant value over the course of the game, but that within an actual action phase round, they might go off 2, maybe 3 times, depending on what your opponent's doing, what you're doing. Are you re-readying a character? Is this being redeployed over somewhere else? Think about all the potential situations that might take place there, and you will start to slowly realize, wow, actually, yeah, Redeploy is pretty good. So that's why every time a Redeploy weapon hits a new set, they always get looked at, because it's a matter of, are they worth playing because of the cost, because of the die, and is it in a good color, because a ranged red weapon would also see a ton of play, and does. There's an F11D rifle, but a ranged blue weapon might not if it had Redeploy, because blue tends to be more melee focused. So take a look at some of these Redeploy weapons when you're making your deck, because you're going to find out that you're going to get a lot of value out of them. So that wraps up our discussion on Star Wars Destiny's keywords, and they were Guardian, Ambush, and Redeploy. And I showed you some cards that have these keywords. In some cases, like in Guardian, I showed you all the cards. For Ambush and Redeploy, I did not show you all the cards because there are just far too many to go over. But you can certainly look them up on any card database that's out there for Destiny, and there are many of them. And I also hope that I've given you a little bit of a strategy piece that you can take to your next couple of games in Destiny, especially with Guardian and Redeploy. And hopefully you've seen Redeploy a little differently. And that even went beyond like beginner stuff, because most people don't think about shooting a weapon twice in a turn, but Redeploy can certainly make that possible. So think about how you might use that in an upcoming game. Ambush, I feel like I could have spent a little more time on that, but essentially with Ambush, there are so many cards that have Ambush. There are over 20. And the general idea behind them is either you want to chain 2 cards in a row, or you want to be able to turn a die and resolve a die without your opponent being able to interact with it. So take a look at those cards yourself and read them and see what kind of stuff you can actually make with them. So I hope you've learned something. And stay tuned for the third video in the series here, where we're going over rule clarifications and trying to teach you some strategy stuff. And that one's going to be on card states, as I call them, and that's going to demystify ready versus activate versus exhausted. Also going to talk a little bit about battlefield, claiming versus control, and go over some examples where that's applicable for the game as well. So as always, if you like what you are listening to, please give me the like, hit the like button, or give me a subscription. That would be super awesome. And in the meantime, may the force be with you.